What is up, everybody? My name is Raymond Summerlin. This is the Thursday edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, the fantasy football preview edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, which means there's only one person to talk to on our wonderful Sharp Football Analysis staff, and that is the one, the only, this Swami of Konami, Mr. Richard Hribar. Actually, Rich, I'm now realizing I don't actually know if you're a Richard or not. Are you a Richard?
I am,
Yeah,
and I try to tell my wife that my name is an allegory or it's Dick Steele is my
Dick
name. So
Steele.
I try to get my wife to refer to me as Dick Steele, and it does not work.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how's that going? has not been effective. I like to elongate names. I like to elongate names like with names that they're not, like like call you Richathan or something like that. I don't know why I do that, but it's always fun for me. It's just my little ADHD fun that I have in my brain to keep my life going. Anyway, how you doing? How the Guardians doing? How's life
Not
treating you?
great. They're not doing great, but we're doing good. It's week 7. We're in the middle of October. The weather, I don't know how it doesn't never gets cold where you are, but like the weather's starting
It
to
is
get like
currently a brisk 63 degrees outside, and I'm liking it. I will definitely be going for a walk once we are finished here.
love to see
I'm
it.
excited about 63 degrees, my friend.
Yeah, it's starting to turn here right around Halloween every year, but I don't know if your old Pennsylvania days, none of the leaves have turned over. Like it gets later and later. So like the leaves
Yeah, yeah.
fall in like November now. So everything's still green here, but this is like the first week where it's been like in the 40s in the mornings, and it's only getting in the 50s.
Yeah, we tried to actually, my wife and I tried to go to Vermont for leaf season
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, and we ended up, it was fine, right? It was fine. But we ended up like a week or two too early because it's apparently shifting. It was still
hmm
nice. I love Vermont. This is an ad for visiting Vermont. I had a great time when I was there, even if the Leafs weren't as pretty as I was hoping. They were really good. I was surprised by the quality of cheese. Is what that would be my takeaway from the Vermont. But anyway, like Sam Darnold's grandpa Dick Hammer. There you go. That's what we in the chat. This is a very week 7. It's a very week 7 start to this podcast. But we actually do have a lot to talk about today with the trades this week and everything that's been going down. So we're going to hit on those trades. We're going to obviously hit on the biggest games of the week as we always do. We're going to do an uncut gem, which I think now for the 6th week in a row, Rich and I don't share what our guide's going to be like ahead of the podcast. And so we get in here and our producer, Matt, asks us, all right, who's going to be your guy? And then we almost invariably over the last 6 weeks have been giving out the same name. So we feel pretty confident about it this week. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Also, head over to Sharp Football Analysis. Over there, you can find all of Rich's worksheet previews. He previews every single game, every single fantasy relevant player from every single game, every single week over at Sharp Football Analysis. That's part of our fantasy package, which you can get 20% off that fantasy package using promo code Angles. If you're listening to this as a podcast, subscribe, rate and review. We appreciate it. If you'd like to listen to this live and ask some questions, which we're going to get to here in a second, ask some questions. You can do that every single Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. That's when we record this. Head over to YouTube, Sharp Football Analysis YouTube, subscribe, and you will get notifications. So we appreciate that. All right, first question here. I actually like this question. Is Drake Maye enough of a Konami code to drop Mahomes for? We're going to talk about Mahomes later on, and he has Caleb Williams on bye, is what he says. I don't think I'm there with Drake Maye, especially with this MRI news that came out on Wednesday. That please don't take Drake Maye from us.
Yeah.
Please don't do that. But I am very excited about him in this matchup. And as we discussed last week, I think the bigger takeaway with Maye here is maybe we're going to be able to stream him in really good matchups like we have this week for sure. This week is a great matchup. So maybe we can stream him in these, but more importantly, maybe we're going to see him get this offense actually moving and be useful. And that's going to be, very helpful to open up some of those ancillary options to Mario Douglas, Hunter Henry, and Ramondre Stevenson, once he gets back, hopefully when he gets back from his injury.
Yeah, that's all we were looking for was to find, because we had nothing. We couldn't start Jacoby Brissett, so we were just looking for, a guy that we could run into some matchups, play as a 2 QB, then stream with some upside, and then hopefully he was going to involve guys like Demario Douglas or Jalen Polk or Hunter Henry, and Demario Douglas definitely was that guy. And if you go back to Drake Maye in college, I mean, he peppered Josh Downs, his second to last season. So maybe he and Demario Douglas, have a little bit of something in the slot. So I know he was a big fab guy probably this week in a lot of leagues. I picked him up in a couple spots too. But yeah, I think we got everything we were looking for. We just hope the knee is okay. It's a really good spot. Would I play him over Mahomes this week? I think it would depend on the matchup. I will say this, though, if you have Mahomes, setting yourself free will be a sweet relief. Because when you have Patrick Mahomes, like you're always going to want to play Patrick Mahomes by default, right? Like you just are
Yeah.
Mahomes. So like if you just don't have him on your roster, you can't do it. Like and you'll just have like this weight lifted off of your shoulders, like this burden alleviated. I think a lot of people feel that way with Mark Andrews, right? People are just like, well, I'm
Sure.
gonna keep playing Mark Andrews, and it's a tight end, so you can. But like you get that release yourself, set yourself free.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, obviously it's one of the biggest games of the week, Chiefs and 49ers. We're going to talk about that game. And my note for Patrick Mahomes was, will Patrick Mahomes ever score another fantasy point? That's what it feels like. That's the level that we've reached with Mahomes. But like from a real perspective, he's been, I think you put in the worksheet, he's been a top 6 scorer twice since the start of last season, which is like wild. How are we here with him? And I know that, I know there was a lot of hope of him having a bounce back this year. And, maybe we'll see it. I don't know. We'll have to see how this offense continues to progress as we get through the year. And it's also possible that this is kind of a choice that they're making, because we saw in the playoffs them be much more successful as an offense last year, and they can kind of ride this defense. And so I mean, there's lots of things that are going on with this offense, but it's so disappointing to go from, Patrick Mahomes being the guy that you could point to and say, all right, you're going to have to, if you're not going to run a ton, he runs a little bit. If you're not going to run a ton, you get a ton of rushing production. You could still get there on elite passing. And we were like, all right, so maybe that's that guy, and he's going to be that guy, and we could see some other dudes do it. And little did we know that the actual guy that's going to do that is Baker Mayfield, and also that Baker Mayfield apparently now just scores rushing touchdowns for fun. And so it's just one of those weird things about this year. It's an odd year.
Yeah, it's fun. It's been fun though. I mean, no, I say like it's we play the game. Like the game goes on. It's been a war of attrition, I think, for a lot of people. But QB in general has been kind of a wild west. Like outside of basically Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, and I think Jalen Hurts still like when he's played. Those are the guys like regular getting there, and then you have kind of like this little pocket of Jordan Love and Baker Mayfield, and Josh Allen's been more of a volatile. He's been like a boomer bust QB1, and Burrow looks like he's joining like that group of Love and Mayfield. And it's just kind of like you can just play dudes. Like if you feel like you're like, oh, I like this matchup, play him. I like Andy Dalton this week, right? Like I would probably play Andy Dalton over Patrick Mahomes. Like so, like yeah, you can just play your guys. I mean, like if you were like aggressive on QB this year and didn't get any of those guys we named, like it's been tough. Kyler Murray, like probably I brought up last week that last week was probably like a selling point for him. Their schedule gets really bad, and he's just been really catawampus, like not really getting his points. So yeah, he's not on the trust tree either at this point.
Yeah, it's been interesting out there. I actually, speaking of Drake Maye, I did just trade for Drake Maye in a 2-quarterback league. It was more a trade for Joe Mixon than it was a trade for Drake Maye. But yeah, I'm in on that. I do want some numbers here for this Patriots. They were 31st in points per drive, yards per play, and yards per pass attempt, ahead of just the Browns in those last two categories over the first 5 weeks. Last week they were 21st in yards per play, 22nd in points per drive, 13th and yards per pass attempts. Are those numbers great? No, they're not great. Are they at least useful? Yes. Please, Drake Maye, please have your knee be fine so we can continue to have useful numbers. All right. Another question here. What running backs would you target to trade for Deontay Johnson? This is such a hard thing to do off the top of our head. What I will say on this is I am much more confident in Deontay Johnson now after Andy Dalton hasn't been great, but you mentioned that we're excited about Andy Dalton this week for, I think, obvious reasons that we'll discuss later. And even with Deontay Johnson struggling, with Andy Dalton struggling, we've seen Deontay Johnson continue to get there. And so I think of Deontay Johnson, like Deontay Johnson was to me 2 weeks ago. I have him in a few leagues, and he was like someone I was trying to shop. I'm not really there anymore with him. And I'm pretty bullish about what we're going to see the rest of the year. The concern, obviously, is what if we get back to Bryce Young at some point, and what does that look like? But yeah, that's kind of where I am on there. But off the top of my head, running backs, I would trade. for Deontay Johnson. I don't know. It's really hard for me to do that off the top of my head. Do you have any thoughts?
This is what I tell people all the time in the Sunday chats and everything. When you have like, if you, the idea shouldn't be to target a specific running back with Deontay Johnson. You need to find the gamers in your league that need Deontay Johnson and then work from there. And then you see what running backs they have. If you're just like, oh, I want to get Breece Hall or say Tony Pollard, right? Probably more realistic or something like whatever. Like, but if that gamer has four good wide receivers, guess what? They don't care. Like, so you need to see who needs Deontay Johnson and hustle backwards. That's how you make successful fantasy football trades in a nutshell. You have to find the gamer that needs what you want to get rid of or what is access for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've recently done that with Tucker Kraft. Who needs a tight end, and that's how you get off of it. And ultimately, that's the way forward. Tony Pollard is a good name. That's in the range, right? That's in the range that we're thinking about. That's a good name. That's a good name for that. All right. Let's talk a little bit about these wide receivers that have been moved in trades. Davante Adams, obviously, we've finally seen that go down with him going to the Jets. Was there any other outcome for Davante Adams in this trade to go to the Jets? And magically, he's healthy now. It's just it's magic. It's just absolute. It's a medical miracle that Davante Adams is healthy again. And then obviously we had Amari Cooper. This was, I think, a little more surprising, not shocking because of what the Bills' wide receiver situation is. But Amari Cooper moved to the Buffalo Bills. I would say that we're probably much more confident in Davante Adams this week than we are in Amari Cooper. We don't even know if Amari Cooper is going to play. But for Adams, I think the interesting question is, what does this do to Garrett Wilson? And can these two guys kind of coexist in this offense?
I believe so. I mean, obviously, we're going to have to let this thing breathe a little bit. But I was really encouraged by what the Jets did on Monday night. Obviously, we'll see how static it is, but they ran their highest rate of pre-snap motion, they ran their highest rate of play action, they ran their highest rate of plays out of the shotgun, and Aaron Rodgers had tremendous success in all three areas compared to when they just had him drop back to pass in that game. We know that there's like a clear rapport with Davante Adams. It's not the same Davante Adams that he had with the Packers. He's going to be 32 in December. But this is these guys have mind melded. Like they've had a lot of reps together. I think that he can step in and be a red zone impact. And Davante Adams isn't washed either by me even saying he's going to be 32. Like he's definitely still clearly good at football. The real big thing is just kind of, how many targets does he take away from Garrett Wilson? Does Garrett Wilson become like one of these guys like Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith have the past couple of years, where they're clearly like wide receiver ones when the other guy's not on the field, but they're more like volatile wide receiver twos playing alongside this like lead target in the offense. So we'll kind of see what that happens. But I definitely believe both these guys can still coexist in this offense. The Jets' schedule the rest of the season is still very palpable. Like it's very good. I'm also curious to see what this does to Breece Hall, because Breece Hall, if you look at his game log, the games he's been good are the games where he's active in the passing game. And under the first game under Town Downing and Jeff Albrook, he was hyperactive in the passing game again. He ran the most routes he ran all season. So does that pull away from, does Davante Adams pull away from him as well? So I'm gonna let this thing breathe a little bit. I definitely like right now, my initial thoughts are to treat like both these guys as like mid-range wide receiver twos with like room to kind of grow or go in like any direction a little bit. And then Breece Hall like is still an RB1, but I still want to see him get those targets. Allen Lazard was already living as like a touchdown guy only. So that was probably going to run out. So he probably gets nuked the most here. And then we probably won't see Mike Williams. He probably was banned by Aaron Rodgers after, Aaron Rodgers did not even let him fall on that sword on Monday night. Yeah. Like Aaron Rodgers just came out after the game, is like, Mike messed it up. So Mike's not off the trust tree.
Apparently he was back in the building today, but yes, he is being moved. Mike Williams will not be on the team any longer. You mentioned that about Lazard and the touchdowns, and you're 100% right that a lot of Lazard's production has been kind of touchdown variants. But I believe ESPN has Allen Lazard 22nd in expected fantasy points this year, and they have Garrett Wilson first in expected fantasy points, and that is, that's a promising sign if you're thinking, all right, are we going to continue to see Wilson doing this? And I think your point about like what we already saw the Jets do. We already saw the Jets make the changes we were hoping to see them make to make this passing game more effective. And we saw them do that without Davante Adams before trading for Davante Adams. Rodgers was obviously great on the dropbacks with, motion and with play action. Will defenses adjust to that? Was that kind of like an unexpected thing? I have to imagine the Bills expected some changes given, that they changed kind of the offensive play calling and things like that. And so, yeah, I'm much more confident in Garrett Wilson than I expected to be when kind of the first news or about the Davante Adams maybe being traded to the Jets. So I'm feeling a lot better about that. I will say this week, this game might be an absolute slog. Like, will the Jets even have to throw in this game with Russell Wilson taking back over, with the James Harden offense returning to the NFL? Will how much are they going to have to
What's
throw?
the total on this
I'm
game?
not
Like
really sure.
36 points?
The total on this game, yeah, 30, I think 38 and a half is what ESPN bet has it over here, if I'm looking at my schedule correctly. It's it's going to be a rough one. It is fitting though that we get the James Harden NFL offense back, and the Clippers are going to be running the James Harden NBA offense this entire season to probably similar success. So it is a very it's a fitting thing for Amari Cooper. We don't know if Amari Cooper's going to play this week. If he does, I'd assume it'd be limited snaps. That if you have Amari Cooper in the short term, I'm not sure you're going to be able to use him this week, or if you do use him, I'm not sure what you're going to like. But I mean, in the long term, this is un kind of equivocally a great situation for Amari Cooper and a massive improvement to what we were seeing in Cleveland, right?
Oh, 100%. Because Amari Cooper for like the past month has had like great matchups on paper, and I mean, we don't even know to play him. Like,
Yeah.
we haven't been able to take advantage of those. He's had probably like one of the worst. He probably did be so relieved, like when this, like people were probably jealous in that building. Like, oh, you're getting
So,
out of here.
well, that's actually one of my points is that Amari Cooper hasn't actually been good this year. Like, he's really struggled, and there were plays available to him, and he did have that one long touchdown call back. That one sticks in
He's
your
getting
brain. Yeah, that one
open.
long touchdown call back, and he's been getting open, but he's had drops and things like that. But you have to wonder what his mindset has been in that offense with Deshaun Watson, and that's what you have to wonder about that entire offense is how are they like what is their mindset? Are they really like, are we seeing the best from guys like Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku? And we're probably seeing the best from, the running backs and Jerome Ford, because like, it can't be like, you can't just continue to ram your head into the wall week after week after week, knowing exactly what the problem is, seeing that nothing's changing about that problem, and then like just continue to do it. That's not human nature. Human nature
Right.
is, what am I doing? Why am I doing this?
And you
Right.
don't see
And I
any
have to
Browns
assume,
players doing what Kevin Stefanski's doing, right? Like, there's no like groundswell. Like, you never heard Amari Cooper after all these games like defending Deshaun Watson. Like, I'm sure they've gotten asked the questions that, but like you don't see like this groundswell of like actual players on the team like having his back publicly. I think internally, like no one's having fun there. No one's having a good time. And I mean, 25% of his targets were inaccurate throws. It was the highest rate for any player to have as many targets as him. And he does have a few drops that are on him too. But I mean, he's going to go play with Josh Allen now. Like, so we got to feel good about it as a pro. I mean, I'm sure some people will be like, "Oh, look at what Stephon Diggs did at the end of last year," but like it's just an upgrade in terms of quarterback play, successful offensive play. Like, it's a net win.
yeah, I mean, like, there's no question. This is a net win for him, and I'm excited. I do have Cooper in a few places, and I'm excited about what this looks like. This looks like long term. A couple more questions in here I want to get to, mostly because there are a couple questions in here about Chase Brown. Chase Brown for I assume Garrett Wilson, Chase Brown or James Conner for the rest of the season. I think that's. I mean, well, I guess let's see what James Conner's ankle injury is, because are we about to hit our month-long James Conner absence? But if James Conner is healthy, that's James Conner, I think, pretty clearly for me. But I do think this shift we've seen, in kind of talking about Chase Brown in general, this shift that we've seen from this Bengals offense, and we continued to see it, even though the touch total maybe wasn't what we were hoping for against the Giants. We continue to see that shift towards more Chase Brown. I think that is promising for his future. If you were a Chase Brown truther like me, who may have drafted him in, I don't know, like 35% of your best ball drafts, you are pretty excited about the trajectory that we're on for Chase Brown.
100%. I mean, he's gotten more backfield touches, share of backfield touches in every single game since week 1. We saw even after the fumble last week, they immediately gave him the ball again the next play and housed a 30-yard touchdown. And he took it into the paint for gamers, right? Like we see that guy go down every time now. And Chase Brown is like, nah, man, I'm getting you guys this tud. He had fantasy gamers back, and you like that he was thinking about us. All we need to really see him kind of overcome is like that final hurdle is like playing these long down and distance passing downs and getting that trust and pass protection, which we haven't seen yet. That's like the last obstacle he needs to knock down, but you're definitely feeling good about it because the Bengals offense is scoring points. We would like to see their defense go back to playing poorly again, but I mean, everything is just moving forward with Chase Brown.
Yeah, this week will be a fun test of is the big well, I guess the Bengals defense is just good. It's just going to be good against the Browns, but it'd be really fun. I wish they were bad because I would like to see if Watson could top 200 yards against the week 2 version of the Bengals defense. That would have been
I mean,
that would
dude,
have
look at
been
who they've played. Like that's the thing with the Browns. Like they played the Commanders, the Raiders, like
yeah,
the
sure.
Eagles. Like I mean, dude, they played a bunch of teams we picked on with everybody. And
Yeah.
I think there was a span in like week 3. It was the Commanders game. I think it was 2 weeks ago where I was like, I'm going to dabble with Amari in this spot, not Watson, but Amari. I will. Where he was priced in DFS, dude. I mean, you just can't. The quality of targets were so bad.
Yeah, it's rough. It's tough scenes. Actually, I guess we should talk about that game with the Bengals defense kind of improving. They have been better against the run lately. I'm operating under the assumption we're going to see Nick Chubb this week
Mm-hmm.
because of kind of what he wrote in the Players Tribune. I'm pretty sure. I don't know if that's been confirmed or not, but I'm pretty confident we're going to see him this week. I'm also though I know how you're going to approach this because of kind of your viewpoint on Nick Chubb that you're going to be very cautious, and I understand that. And I think that's probably the right point of view. But what I'll say is I'm not so confident that they're going to treat him with kid gloves simply because of the state of this offense, simply because of what we saw this offense do last week. We saw the run transition last week. We saw they were first in neutral pass rate weeks 1 through 5. They were 19th last week. They were 3% over their expected pass rate through the first 5 weeks. They were 6% under their expected pass rate last week. We've heard chatter coming out of that building that they're going to transition more into this kind of under center running game. And that was something they wanted to do against the Eagles. I assume that a lot of that is in response to Nick Chubb coming back. And I actually think we might be surprised by how much work Nick Chubb gets this week. That's not saying that I would like rank him as a top 12 running back. That's not saying that if you have good options, you should start Nick Chubb instead of them. But if you're desperate and need to start Nick Chubb, I'm there for it. And if I'm thinking about him in DFS, there's at least an opportunity here because I don't assume that he will be on many rosters that we could see more from Nick Chubb than we expect just based on the state of this offense, where this team is, where this coaching staff is, and the fact that they need something. They need something to kind of get it going.
Yeah, I think DFS is probably a bridge too far at his price because you need multiple touchdowns from him to even have like a tournament worthy
His
score.
price, yeah, his price is the problem because you're not getting him at like a discount, but like you
Yeah, like
probably
if
are going
he
to
was
get him
like
at low
5K or
low ownership.
something, like
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
like the
Yeah,
problem is
absolutely.
because we know he's not, even if he has more touches than we assume, we know he's not going to play like passing stuff. Like,
Yeah,
so like
agreed.
from a DFS like tournament winning score, like at his price, like you've got to get, because I think at FanDuel he's 6'8", and then at DraftKings, he is real quick, everyone's favorite part of the show when you just type something in. He's 6K. So like you got to
Yeah,
flirt with like
it's tough.
24 PPR points,
Yeah.
which is tough, which I think is tough to play. Now, if you're in a season long league and you're just up against it and you need a body and like you just hope he falls in the end zone, like because I think the touches he will get, like if they're inside the 10-yard line, I do think he will be the guy, like getting those touches. You just need him to get there, and you got to hope you don't get scripted out also as a 6-point underdog this weekend. So I do think that they will probably take it cautious with him just because of the severity of the injury, and then Nick Chubb's probably a guy that you have to police himself from himself. I get that vibe,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he was out there like, squatting 600 pounds or whatever he does, back in the summer. So like you got to also protect a player like that from himself too. But we're glad to have him back. For all the guys we've lost along the way this season, we are getting a couple guys back this week. It looks like Malik Neighbors is going to be back. It looks like TJ Hawkinson might play some snaps too in a barren wasteland of a tight end position. And hopefully Jonathan Brooks in a couple weeks comes back, although that could just be worse for all of us because it could just be a muddy
Yep.
mess.
Yeah, Chuba Hubbard's been usable, and when he comes back, they both might just not be usable. On Hawkinson, I actually read something from somebody in Minnesota that because they play on Thursday in Week 8, that they might
They
not
might
bring him
hold him
back
out.
this week. They might wait. They might hold him out, and so we'll have to see on that. There's actually Jesse in the chat traded Kittle for Brian Thomas Jr. Still has Bowers, picked up Hawkinson. Um, I don't know if like from a value perspective, if I like Brian Thomas Jr. better than Kittle. I do like Brian Thomas Jr. We like how he started the season. Last week wasn't so great from his perspective in that. I think I'd probably rather have Kittle, but this is kind of one of those examples that you were talking about
Yeah.
where you have to find trades that work for you. And
Mhm.
even if you put it into a trade analyzer, and because of the state of tight end and because of what we've seen Kittle do as a touchdown scorer without Christian McCaffrey, but again, Christian McCaffrey's probably coming back soon, so we'll see how kind of that changes. That you would probably say you value Kittle more, but if you have Bowers and you also were able to get Hawkinson, and you need a wide receiver, it kind of is what it is. Another question here: would you trade Garrett Wilson and Baker Mayfield for Jamar Chase? I mean, that's another one. It depends on what your quarterback situation is, but I would probably say yes to that, just because getting Jamar Chase is awesome, and you could probably cobble together at quarterback. But again, if you're in like a 16 team 2 quarterback league, then that probably changes that 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 uh that algebra a little bit, that calculus a little bit. So just the way to think about trades. All right, let's move on and talk about some game previews. Before we do that, remember, you can get a preview of every single fantasy player in every single game over at Sharp Football Analysis from Rich Hribar. He calls it the worksheet. It is the best way to get ready for the fantasy football week. You can use promo code ANGLES to get 20% off our fantasy package to get all of those worksheet previews every single week, along with his DFS picks, which you want his DFS picks at the way that he's going. So you're gonna be feeling pretty good, I think, about the DFS situation if you get that package. Also, while we're here, if you're listening, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you head over to YouTube and subscribe to Sharp Football Analysis YouTube to get notified when you go live. All that fun stuff. All right, let's talk about Kansas City at San Francisco. San Francisco's 1.5 point favorites, 46.5 point total. This is not as high of a total of the games we normally talk about, but this is very obviously the game of the week. It very obviously the game that many of us are excited about this week. We've already talked about Patrick Mahomes and kind of that situation. So I think one of the more interesting things coming out of this is, what are we doing with Jordan Mason, who did practice on Wednesday, did practice on Monday. On Monday, we saw him with a non-contact jersey. I looked for information on what we saw on Wednesday. I wasn't able to find it. So I don't know if he was non-contact again on Wednesday. But you raised some in your worksheet kind of write up for this. You raised some, I think, important and correct concerns about what we might see even if Jordan Mason plays.
Yeah, I mean, one, it's his injury is basically, just a tolerance injury. So like he can re-aggravate it if he takes a shot on the shoulder. So there's a lot of risk just in that regard. And then the matchup is absolutely horrible. Like when you look at what the Chiefs have done, I mean, they are number one in the NFL in rate of running back runs allowed that don't go for 10 or more yards. And look at the guys they've played. It's not like this is like a team too, when you look at like the opening 6 week schedule and you're like, they've got these stats against like bombs. Like the most rushing yards they've allowed in a game this season is 46 yards. They faced Derrick Henry, J.K. Dobbins, Alvin Kamara, Bijan Robinson. Like they faced like actually good players. And when these teams played in the Super Bowl a year ago last year, I mean, Christian McCaffrey only had 3.6 yards per carry. And when you talk about Jordan Mason from a fantasy stance, he's a guy that's predicated on volume and touchdowns. He's not catching any passes, right? Like he's got what, eight receptions on the year. So we need him to get volume, which is compromised by the potential of his injury, like if he were to re-aggravate it. And then from an efficiency stance, we can't bank on that because of the matchups. Then we just basically are touchdown hunting now at this point. So I think he's got a pretty fragile floor in this game. I want to handle him more as like a volatile RB2. Like you're probably not benching him in very many circumstances given the landscape. But, if you did run into, a guy this weekend that has a great matchup, you might want to consider it, to be honest.
Yeah, and I also take it from like that matchup perspective to the other side about what happens if Jordan Mason, ends up sitting out this game, because you and I for a couple weeks talked about, Isaac Garindo as somebody that we were, that was being overlooked as kind of a high upside handcuff, not being, thought of in that same level as like a Braylon Allen. And then we saw when Mason left last week that we first of all saw a split between Garindo and Patrick Taylor, which is not, I don't think, something both you and I expected. And then we saw him get that long run that he claims he wasn't run down. He claims he intended to not score a touchdown. Kyle Shanahan doubted that. We'll see. We're going to give it to him. We're going to give it to him that we made the right play. But before that, on his other 9 carries, he had 23 yards. And so it's in this matchup, if they're going to be a split between those two guys again, even if Mason sits, you can't be excited about them. It's just kind of one of those frustrating situations for people trying to set fantasy lineups.
100%. He only had 9 of 19 non-quarterback runs after Jordan Mason left the game. And he is a big play guy. Like he's a home run hitter. Like he will strike out. And then when he gets to the edge, I mean, that's what he did in college in the outside zone run scheme. Like he was a perfect fit for this because he can, like, you give him a tarmac, like he'll get going. So he could still break one, but we know they already told us like last Thursday, like this dude's not going to be involved in the pass game. Like that's like the biggest thing, right? Juszczyk was running routes over him. Patrick Taylor was running routes over him. And then you also, anytime the 49ers are down a running back, you have the Deebo Samuel factor. Like Deebo probably is going to get more work in the backfield too. I would say Deebo's going to get more work in the backfield even if Jordan Mason's playing.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And then you always worry about Deebo getting a rushing touchdown, and there it is. So it's a tough situation. It's a tough situation for kind of all involved. Speaking of the other backfield's interesting because after we saw Isaiah Pacheco kind of go down, we had lots of questions. They added Kareem Hunt, obviously, and we had questions about that who was going to take over. And before the bye, we saw that Kareem Hunt did that. He just came in, completely took over. That was surprising to me, to be honest about it. And he had been successful, which he wasn't last year in Cleveland. Although we can ask the same Cleveland questions for him that we asked about Amari Cooper earlier, can't we? We can ask a lot of questions there. But he was definitely the guy before the bye. They've now activated Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So I wonder kind of what we're going to see here. But how confident are you in Kareem Hunt that we're going to continue to see him be the guy in this backfield?
I definitely think he'll still be the favorite until he messes it up, but I still feel very mildly about the situation, because he wasn't, even last week, he got a ton of touches, or week 5, because they didn't play last week. He had a ton of touches, but it's not like he was like uber efficient on him. He just stacked a bunch of touches. But this is what this version of the Chiefs want to do. It's what we talked about a little bit with Mahomes. Like they want to play defense and like try not to make mistakes. Like that's kind of where we're at. It's such a bummer, man. It is like really such a bummer that like Patrick Mahomes is like a game manager now. But their defense is awesome. And if they just don't make mistakes, like they're going to be in just position to like not lose games. And that's like the Chiefs are just good enough, right? Like, are they like the team that were like the Death Star that they were, a couple seasons ago on offense? No, but like this whole conglomeration of what they have defensively and from a quarterback talent perspective still, even though it's not scoring fantasy points, like they're good enough to win games. And that's what sucks from us. Like there's a gamer stance. Like we want them to be cool and fun.
Disappointment in your face. So if you're not watching live, couldn't see just the utter disappointment and contempt in Rich's face. Yeah, but I mean, we would like there to be more fantasy points. That would be great. Just bob it to Xavier Worthy and see how many of those.
Mahomes is still awesome. Like
on.
you see some of the plays he makes still, and you're just like, he's still good. But it's like it's crazy. He's like literally like I don't even know, like Jared Goff, right? Like for fantasy, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, but Mahomes is still awesome. I want that to be clear. I want that to be the clear takeaway here. He might not be scoring fantasy points, but he's still the best.
And you get him as an underdog this week, which, no player, like if you ever wanted to bet, like there's two things. Like anytime the Chiefs are losing, I always tell my son this. I'm like, well, we got to go bet the Chiefs. Like, right. Like you always bet the Chiefs in game on the money line when they're losing. And like Mahomes as a dog, I know they're not going to win every game, but that's an interesting game. Yeah. I mean, Spags has had 2 weeks to knowing he was going to face Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan, right? Like, so I'm very curious to see what the Chiefs defense has, coming out of the bye.
As soon as the Chiefs go down by 10, just head over live betting, head straight over, bet the money line.
Tried and true.
And you're gonna be doing fine. One more Chief here to talk about, and I assume you're gonna throw cold water on my Miss Schuster love. What I will say is it does say a lot about kind of where we are in a fantasy landscape that Smith-Schuster had that big game right before the bye, and we didn't actually see his roster percentage jump a ton. He was still available to be in my waiver column this week, which was a little bit surprising to me, because I actually think that before their last game, I said that Smith-Schuster is the most likely to get those Rashid Rice targets. I was not like super excited about it. And I was not saying that like I didn't think he was going to have the game that he had, obviously, but he was always the most likely to get those targets. And then he got those targets. And to me, that's suggesting we need to take this seriously. Obviously, last year we didn't see it from him, but 2 years ago with the Chiefs, he wasn't consistently great. He only had like 2 or 3 like real pop games that I can remember, but he was pretty consistent and he was getting those targets. We know that they want those targets in this offense the way that they're playing it. It seems like those are going to go to Smith-Schuster. And it's weird to me. And I know the state of the Chiefs offense and I know all of that, but it's weird to me that there isn't a little bit more excitement about him in fantasy circles because like this, if you say, okay, this is probably what's going to happen, and then that's what happens, then that leads to me believing, okay, this is a real thing. And so I do think we're going to see him get peppered with a lot of targets. Is it going to be particularly high upside? Is he going to get a lot of touchdowns? I don't know. But if you're hurt, like for people that are hurting for receivers or whatever, it's odd how many leagues he's still available in.
Yeah, if you're in a full PPR league, I definitely think he kind of slots in that area, like where gamers have been playing like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Wandell Robinson, not quite as much volume there, but like, Josh Downs, like that type of area. I mean, we're only 2 years removed. He had 100 targets with the Chiefs, 2 years ago. And like we talked about Kareem Hunt with the Browns last year, maybe last year's Patriots were really bad. And, so that like he had 100 targets and 900 yards. Is that going to like win you your league? No, but it's usable, and it's from a quarterback that we know is still capable of playing real football at a high level. So I'm actually with you on this one as far as like for a floor based perspective, at least for the short term. Like we'll see. I think that this situation is still pretty fluid. We did see them because they're going to continue to put more on Xavier Worthy's plate, and we saw that even a little bit before the bye. He actually ran more routes from the slot than JuJu did. And I think they're going to try to continue to ramp him up. We still might get Hollywood Brown back at some point. Who knows? So at least short term, though, I want to ride it. I mean, DraftKings also didn't price him up, and he's only 4K. And, from a cash game perspective or like a pay down perspective, 4K and full PPR, like he's pretty playable at that price for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I agree about that for sure. All right, let's move on and talk about the Lions at Minnesota. Minnesota -1.5, 50.5 point total. I think the real question for this game for me going in is, can the Lions get pressure without Aiden Hutchinson? And if not, what happens to this pass defense? Like that to me is the real big question because they've been bad without pressure. Not bad. They've been less effective as most defenses are without pressure, but we've seen them be like comparatively how they rank getting pressure and not getting pressure. We've seen them be comparably worse not getting pressure. Aiden Hutchinson has been that guy that's gotten pressure for them. He's got a 25% pressure rate this year, which is an unbelievable rate. Now that he's gone, how are they going to manufacture that? Is it going to be the interior guys? Are they going to have to get more from them? Like, where is that coming from? And if they're not able to get that, is this kind of Detroit pass defense that has been pretty good and is not a defense that we've really been targeting? Does this turn into another defense that we target again?
Yeah, we talked about the Lions defense, like just from where they were last year, and they're not like, like the 85 Bears or anything right now, but them going from just being like the worst pass defense in the NFL last year to middle of the pack is seismic. Like that's like absolutely significant. And that's kind of where they were. So yeah, if Aiden Hutchinson is not able to get pressure on the quarterback and they're not able to get pressure without him on the field, it does become a little bit problematic. I think that's definitely a spot here. This is an exciting game for me from, obviously as the real football kind of, tie-in, obviously of the undefeated Vikings, a division rival. Like this is a pretty big game. There's a lot of fun fantasy pieces in this game. So it has like that intersection. Whereas like 49ers Chiefs is actually oddly enough more of like a better real football game than a fantasy football game. This one has a little bit more crossover. That's what makes it really fun because I'm really excited about this game from a lot of angles, even the flip side too. Brian Flores and like they faced a lot of good offenses that they slowed down. This is another one. I mean, the Lions are absolutely humming right now. Like the first like opening 3 games, Jared Goff really didn't play well, and he's been absolutely incredible like the past 3 weeks. And this team has looked like they've looked like the way they've looked the last 2 times we've seen them. Like, how do you stop these guys? Because they run, they pass, they take vertical shots, they've got underneath dudes. They're out here just having fun too. Like we're going to throw to linemen, we're running trick plays to Sam Laporta. Like everything they're doing is working. So I'm so excited to see like the cat and mouse game for Brian Flores and Ben Johnson in this game too. This is probably like the game that has that largest intersection of real football and fake football goodness.
Yeah, I'm excited about this game too. Looking at it from, first of all, please, Aaron Jones play. For all of our sakes, please play. We get excited about that one. But I will say that this does not feel like a great game for David Montgomery. I feel like we've been waiting for that shoe to drop for a while, but this really does feel like the game that we might not be that excited about David Montgomery, right?
I mean, yeah, on the surface, but I mean, this running game is so good. Like they kind of just get there against everybody. I mean, he wasn't particularly great in this matchup last year, only 3.5 yards to carry, but he still scored 2 touchdowns. Like that's kind of where we are with him, right? Like, so I mean, it's again like it's a situation like who are you sitting him for? If you have to raise some questions, like, but like I believe in this offense, and he's been so good this year. So but yeah, I mean, from a top-down perspective, we were in a spot with this a couple weeks ago though with Nico Collins, and like he caught a 70-yard touchdown, like the third play of the game, and so
Yeah, it is one of those
because
situations.
you
What
expect, I
about
mean, he's not going to score a touchdown every game. We inherently know this, but like, what do you like?
do
So you
we
say,
do we inherently know this?
I mean, we assume.
We assume that he will not be scoring a touchdown every game. But I do think, like, if I'm looking at this game and what we maybe hope this game environment will be with how quickly the Vikings have been able to get on top of opponents, which has very clearly been what they've been trying to do. This does feel more like a Jahmyr Gibbs game for me. And like, especially if we're talking about it, you mentioned it from a, who do you have to start over David Montgomery? And that's a fair question in redraft. But if we're thinking about attacking this game from a DFS perspective, to me, and I'm assuming you're agreeing about this, I'm gonna be a lot more excited about Gibbs than would be about David Montgomery, especially since we actually saw him catch passes last week, which that's exciting to once again see.
Yeah, and I mean, very unusual game for the Lions last week. Typically they have a pretty concentrated target tree. They had 10 guys get targets in that game last week. Got Tim Patrick and Khalif Raymond were getting multiple targets, which we have not really seen from them the past couple seasons. Hopefully we do not continue to see more of that going forward, but something to keep an eye on because, I mean, Amon-Ra's had a few games this year now where because typically Amon-Ra, you just pencil him in for like the 8 to 12 targets, right? And we've had like 3 games this year where he's had 6 or fewer targets, and like those aren't the Amon-Ra games we're used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, we saw Sam Laporta, he got his touchdown, but it was one target. And so I'm going to ask you what I ask you every single week about all of these tight ends that disappoint. What do we do with Sam Laporta, Rich?
The same thing as I see. Just what do you do, man? You just got to keep towing the line. I mean, what are you gonna
Yeah, you
do?
keep playing Sam Laporta.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
that's kind
what
of
are you
that's
gonna do? Pick up Cade Otton, Dalton Schultz? Like, what are you? I mean,
hold
what are
on.
you gonna do?
Touchdown scorer, K. Dotton. And
Yeah, but I mean, that's like what the world we are. Like these
yeah,
guys that are available. Like, what are
yeah,
you gonna do,
it's
man?
tough.
It's terrible. You just hope
It's
too.
it's
Like,
re-
hopefully we can get Hawkinson back, and he kind of shorts it up. Hopefully, Tucker Craft is something. David Njoku is something post Amari trade. Evan Ingram's back. We hope we're getting some bodies back.
hopefully we get Tommy Tremble doesn't come back and ruin
Right.
all of my Jatavian Sanders love. Hopefully we don't get that. Speaking of Jatavian Sanders, let's talk about that Carolina at Washington game. Washington minus 8.5, 51.5 point total. And I mean, you and I kind of discussed this in a call that we were on yesterday, but this is the game environment. This is the one we are pumped about this game.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm writing these players up every week and, I'm looking for these, like the intersection of, player performance and then matchup, like it's hard not to like be excited about like all these pieces, and if we know exactly have full clarity on the Washington backfield, like we'd feel uber popular about those guys too. It's hard to find a guy in this game where you're just like, this doesn't line up. Like, I mean, this is literally a smoke 'em if you got 'em game. Like everyone in this game is absolutely playable. We have seen a couple of teams not get there against the Commanders. Like they've had some moments where they look competent on defense the past couple weeks, but like how much was that just Deshaun Watson? How much was that just Kyler Murray, given the sample we've seen from those players now that have fleshed out? And Andy Dalton, like we talked about a little bit of the open, like he's had a little bit of a downswing since the opening start that he had against the Raiders. But then when you kind of go under the hood, he's faced 3 teams that are top 10 in the NFL in yards per pass attempt allowed too. So like these are also matchups where we wouldn't expect him to have like hyper efficient performances. So we could see a bounce back for efficiency from him, like we saw, maybe not quite like that Raiders game, but definitely more than what we've seen, the 5.5, the 4.9, the 5.8 yards per pass attempt the past 3 weeks. We might be able to get him in, the high 6s and 7s in this game. And then we're getting more run out for other players in this game. But yeah, this is a game like you have to really, really twist my arm to find some guys I don't want to play in this game.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, the running game for Washington, Brian Robinson Jr. We saw him on Wednesday. If he's back, obviously we're getting excited about that. But I also look at what we saw last week in that game and kind of what the Ravens have been doing against the run. And it was kind of disappointing with Robinson out, what we saw from Jeremy McNichols. But like I would expect this would be the type of game environment if Robinson was to sit, that like McNichols is even in play. Like that's kind of where we are in this entire situation. And what you mentioned about Dalton, I think is really important to remember. Is it hasn't been that good, but it has been a tough run of defenses. This is not that. The Commanders are 30th in yards per attempt allowed, 31st in touchdown rate allowed. This is just like we're attacking everybody. In fact, when we move on and talk about our uncut gems, as it turns out, both of the uncut gems that we're wanting to talk about are from this game, and that's not really a surprising thing. I do want to ask you about kind of Austin Eckler. I guess we haven't gotten. Last week it's kind of hard to know, and Robinson was kind of hurt the week before that. But to me, it seems like we've gotten everything we've wanted to get out of Austin Eckler this season, even with that game missed. He looks like he's kind of back to where he was. And I think if you drafted Austin Eckler, from my perspective, you're feeling pretty good about it. And this is the kind of thing I think we're going to see throughout the rest of the season. What are kind of your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, he's looked explosive. He's generating explosives in both the run and pass game, and we just kind of ran into a kind of a terrible matchup where then they got pushed into a passing script, right? I also was kind of entering last week thinking like, all right, well, this Washington run game's been good enough. Maybe they will like schematically just be able to generate some plays here, and they didn't. They didn't run the football effectively at all, and they fell behind, and we kind of really didn't see any of this backfield be productive at all. But yeah, I mean, you look at him, he's run just under 10 yards per touch. This is a spot, I think, when you look at the Carolina Panthers, I mean, they're doing exactly what they did last year. And they keep losing defensive players too. Like we lose a starter for the Panthers, and these guys are starting on an already bad defense. Like the next man up's not as good as the guy that was in. We just keep losing starters. They're about 13 touchdowns to running backs. We saw last week Bijan and Tyler Algier get there. And they've allowed a top 6 score in every week but that Raiders week. They've actually allowed, I think, like 7 top 15 scoring running backs. They've only played 6 games. So this is, like I said, twist my arm. Find me a guy that's not playable in this game.
Absolutely. All right, let's get through some of the questions in here. Better waiver ad, Trevor Lawrence or Drake Maye? MRI scaring me. I still think it's Drake Maye, and if the MRI comes back negative, you reassess, or comes back not negative, it comes back with like a negative outcome. You reassess there, and you go from there. I assume you're not going to have much pushback on that.
No, I'm fine with it. I mean,
Perfect.
Jags are another
Curious on,
bad vibes team. Bad vibes team.
it not only has their defense been awful and definitely been a defense you want to attack, but they've been stuck in London together for a week with a team that apparently doesn't want their coach to still be their coach. And so you take that information,
I don't even know if he
however,
wants to be
however
their coach. So it's
I'm positive he doesn't. I'm positive he's hoping for the for the pink slip. So that's kind of where we are. It's a good question. Curious on your thoughts on a Bub Means rest of season. I mean, we'll have to see what happens with Shaheed. Shaheed's having his knee surgery on Thursday. That's the day we're recording after this, and so it seems like that surgery will determine whether we'll see Shaheed again this season or not. I hope we do. Both you and I are pretty heavily invested in Shaheed, but we also just like him as a player. He's a fun player. I'd like to see him keep playing, but we'll see what happens. But what's your thoughts on Bub Means?
Yeah, all the good wide receiver draft picks are dying. Like all the guys that were just like legitimately great value picks, like Rashid Rice and Malik Neighbors. Well, Malik Neighbors is coming back, but he did miss 2 games. And Shaheed was a guy that we were just targeting. It's just like, man, let us have something this year. Just let us have something. But if Shaheed, let's just say like worst case scenario, Shaheed's out the rest of the year, right? Because we don't know. That's on the table. That's why I think Bub Means is worth picking up even if you don't need him this week. Because I actually don't even really love him in this game tonight, in this matchup. But assuming we get Derek Carr back and Bub Means gets like he occupates that role that Shaheed had, I think that's positive because that's what he was in college. Like this is an athlete. He ran a 4.43 40. He is 6'1", 212 pounds. He's got huge hands and long arms. Like this guy can make vertical plays. He didn't catch a lot of balls at Pitt, but ones he did, they were splash plays. And I think that's what this offense has shown it can generate in the passing game when it's working. I'm sorry I mushed them so early in the season, but we have to assume that Carr comes back. They do get linemen back at some point. And so worst case scenario, if Shaheed's out the rest of the year, Means I think could enter into be like a volatile, like, wide receiver 4 flex upside type of guy the rest of the season. I think he's definitely worth a pickup to kind of see where the Shaheed news goes, even if you don't need him tonight and he was just available. So yeah, I would pick him up definitely.
Yeah, I definitely was more excited about him as an ad after we heard the Shaheed news. Obviously, I was very upset to hear the Shaheed news. But we're talking about Bub Memes. It kind of looked like it was going to be a 1 week thing, and now it looks like it'd be more than that. And I think your point about his athleticism, his relative athletic score, so out of 10 was 9.74. That's a very high level athlete he tested as. And so that is, you're going to be excited about that. Joanna, we're going to get to Jalen Coker here in a second. Pick up Romeo Doubs or Demario Douglas. I'd pick up Douglas, but I do want to talk about Doubs. I believe I've said the exact phrase on this show, 2 touchdowns are within the game outcomes of
Always.
Romeo Doubs because he's just on the field all the time. Those 2 touchdowns to me didn't change who Romeo Doubs is as a kind of fantasy asset. You are excited that he came back and he was playing and all of that stuff. But I mean, it doesn't change to me at least what we think about Romeo Doubs. I would rather have Douglas. Douglas is, if things work out well here, is going to be the very clear number 1 receiver on that team. So I'd be excited about this. This question, though, right above this, Demario Douglas or JuJu Smith-Schuster this week, I'm leaving that to you, the ranker, because that's a tough one for me.
I would rather play Demario Douglas against the Jaguars, like pretty much. Douglas, and this goes back to last year. Like this guy's earned targets. Like when he plays, he earns targets. I mean, we've seen him now. This is the 3rd time over the past 4 weeks he's had a target share of 29% or more. And we go back to last year when he had the run. So like, I feel good about Demario Douglas as like, that extension of group of guys that we talked about, right? The Wan'Dale Robinsons, the Josh Downs, the Jackson Smith and Jigbas, right? That's like kind of where I believe he's going to be like a floor-based player. You hope to run some touchdowns. And he has a great matchup this week. So I do like Douglas a little bit more just from the matchup perspective.
We have a question here about benching or starting. What I'll say is Rich Hribar hosted, that's that guy on the other side. I don't know why I said your last name. Rich hosts a live Sunday morning Q&A every single week that you should go and check out. It's for our fantasy subscribers at Sharp Football Analysis. Make sure you go and check that out every week, and you can ask him kind of these bench questions. He asks a lot of them there. I do think he asked about Ladd McConkey, and I am very interested in kind of where we are with Ladd McConkey. We saw Justin Herbert have his most attempts in any game this past week. Was that just kind of like a fluky thing? Is he healthy and they're going to have him throw more? That doesn't sound like the Jim Harbaugh that I know. And so, like, if you're getting a lot of target share from McConkey, and this is kind of one of those questions about, we focus so much on target share and targets per route and things like that because those are efficiency numbers and they are generally, going to be a little bit, maybe a little bit better, right? For us trying to like predict what's going to happen in the future if they get more opportunities. But ultimately for McConkey, it does just come down to how many targets are available in this offense.
Right.
And I don't know how many targets are available in this offense. And that makes it, especially with the kind of targets he's getting, it really always makes it difficult for me to get too excited about him.
Yeah, and they ran 75 plays last week. That's, how Herbert's attempts got up there, right? Like, they ran 10 more plays they did in any game this season. It was only the second time they ran more than 54 plays in a game. And that's how we got to that raw, like, drop back number. I think that's a little harder to kind of pinpoint saying as something we'll see against this Cardinals defense that literally is not stopping anybody. It's probably going to be a J.K. Dobbins game. But that's like the story. This is why we do things like target share, though, too, is we talked about it a couple weeks ago with Kyle Pitts when Kyle Pitts' box score looked good. And you're like, well, he was still out targeted by the 3 wide receivers. Like, we can't really take this, into account because he had 14% of the team targets. When they have 30 pass attempts, what's it going to look like? And McConkey's the inverse of that. He has a high target share, but he's 75th in wide receivers and routes run per game. He's 40th in wide receivers and targets per game. He's 11th in rate of targets, like share of team targets. So we just need more dropbacks for him to be more effective. I do think if you have him, this is a spot objectively you would be more excited to use him in, because again, the Cardinals, to play everyone against the Cardinals if you got him, even Romeo Dobbs. So yeah, I think this is a spot you would feel good about playing Ladd McConkey if you have him. But he's a guy, probably big picture, he's going to be more frustrating, I think, than weekly starter.
Yeah, that's where I am on him as well. And it's why I really struggled to get excited about any Chargers receiver in draft season. I don't have a ton of them. I did take some pops on Quentin Johnson on, we have a guy that I didn't even like pre-draft, but do we have a second season explosion? But it's going to be tough every single week, especially now we're getting DJ Chark back as well, and we'll kind of have to see what his role is and kind of what that looks like. So it's going to be interesting. A few more here before we move on Uncut Gems. Thoughts on Kenneth Walker on the ground this week? I'm more interested, though, with Kenneth Walker. I do think it's a good, fair question, Peter, but I'm more interested in Kenneth Walker, what we've seen his role turn into, and how we have to feel a lot better about where we are with Kenneth Walker kind of moving forward in general.
Yeah, I wrote about this a couple weeks ago in the worksheet that, he was running more routes than he ever has in his career. They talked about this in the offseason, him being involved as a pass catcher. And I kind of side-eyed a little bit because I'm like, well, if you're throwing to Kenneth Walker, it means you're not throwing to your wide receivers, which are very good. And it turns out when you lead the NFL in dropbacks per game, there's enough to go around. You could spread some targets out. But this is the thing we always were looking for with Kenneth Walker, because through his first years of his career, he was very Nick Chubian, but not as efficient, right? Like he housed a long run, but he wasn't giving you anything in games where he didn't score a touchdown. And now we've seen him have really struggled to have efficiency rushing back-to-back games and be live for fantasy football. I mean, he's been a top 15 scoring running back in every week, despite not really running the ball well. And that's something we wouldn't have had as a floor. So now he's turned into a high floor, high upside player, which is tremendous. I don't know, be honest. I don't know if there's a running back I would rather have rest of the season than Kenneth Walker. I think Saquon's close, but I do have some questions about Saquon's actual receiving floor rest of the season now that everyone's back. But that's really it. I think Kenneth Walker would definitely it'd be a very thin list of guys rest of the season I would want over Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, I tried unsuccessfully to trade for him in a couple leagues before this last game. I think the trajectory that we've seen for Kenneth Walker is, certainly promising. A few more here. Do I trade Sam Laporta and Scary Terry for Bijan and Jake Ferguson? That seems like a no-brainer to me. Am I missing something on that trade, Rich? Laporta and Terry McLaurin for you get back Bijan and Jake Ferguson?
Yeah,
That's easy money, right?
Yeah, I'm in.
I'm in on that one. One more trade here. I'm interested. This is not the kind of trades that we normally talk about with Rachaad White for Javonte Williams, but that feels to me like this running back for running back trade's always odd. It's always strange. But that feels to me like you are taking on the risk in that trade for the ultimate maybe upside, because what Javonte Williams is now is probably what he's going to be. We'll see if Audric Estime can take on more of the work. I hope that he can. That would be a more interesting kind of situation. But like Rachaad White could just not be involved in this offense for most of the rest of the season. He's hurt right now. We'll see. But at least you have like some hope or thought that you're going to get like a actual good running back from Rachaad White. And I don't think that exists for Javonte Williams. Do you think that exists for Rachaad White?
Not really.
Yeah. All right. So there we are. Never mind. Sorry, Chris. Just hold on.
I
Nothing
mean,
matters.
You can't feel good about Rachaad White right now.
Oh, absolutely not. Hold on. I want to be clear about what I'm saying here. The probably floor here for Rachaad White is maybe even lower than Javonte Williams. We could see a scenario where Rachaad White is just not even involved in this offense at all. We'll see what his injury is. I'm just saying that, like, do you see any long-term upside outcome for Javonte Williams? Do you see any one of them? I don't.
Not really. He's got to start scoring touchdowns, and that's an offense that's just not going to score touchdowns. I mean, his usage has been fine. Like from a usage stance, looks fine. It's just the offense isn't very good, and that's what's kind of just keeping him as like this floor-based flexy type of guy.
Yeah. All right. Rich doesn't care about either of those guys.
I
Is
really
what
don't. I
that's.
don't. To be
Yeah, I
honest.
know. That's what I really love though. Is this is like we
Like
have
your
this kind of
season's
talk.
not going to come down. This is not an inflection point for your season.
I,
I assure you.
I agree with that. We all agree. Yes, we're in agreement about that. It's just so funny how I think about these players every week, I guess. And so like to me, they're so interesting to think about these kind of players where it's like, I don't care. Which fair. I think he's right, by the way, to not care. I'm on his side. I'm on his side. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about Uncut Gems here. We both have Carolina wide receivers to talk about this week. We're so excited about that game. So who is your Carolina wide receiver to talk about?
Yeah, I do prefer your guy, but you said we were going to go with your, so it's like we might as well talk about him. But I do want to bring up Jalen Coker as well, as
Yeah.
just this guy, this like if you're from the heart of darkness in these deep leagues, or you're just trying to punt something in the stacking of this game. He has been on the field for 66% and 75% of the dropbacks the past 2 games. He looks like he's pretty clearly jumped Jonathan Mingo at this point, and he's been relatively okay. 4 for 68. And 3 for 30 of those games. He was Steve Smith's favorite route runner in this class. I don't know if that's Carolina bias or not from him, but he was, an effective player at Holy Cross, mind you. But from a physical profile stance, this is a big wide receiver, huge vertical leap from him. So he has some physicality to him as well, which I think is intriguing. So really, it's just this game, like taking a bet on this game environment. Because I do think your guy, Noah Brown, is in play as well in this game. I just think from a actual drop back stance, the Carolina guys are just bettable to run more raw routes than the Washington guys, right? And that's kind of why I lean towards Legette and Coker over Noah Brown. But I also do think your guy, Noah Brown, is in play in the same bucket this week. I just feel like Carolina chasing points in this game is going to lead to more opportunities for the ancillary Carolina guys than the Washington guys.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about having Noah Brown here as well because I do think these secondary options, tertiary options in this offense are really worth looking at in both of these offense. But I had Xavier Legette, which is was definitely I think the first of all, he's on more rosters than either of the other 2 guys who we're
Right.
talking about. So we're not going out on a limb with Xavier Legette. And we're going back to the well here because we had him a couple weeks ago when he came through. And I'm not going back to the well on him because he scored a touchdown last week. That's not really what I'm
Ride
excited
that
about.
pony. He's riding that pony.
It was a great celebration, to be fair to him, and so that certainly did in our cool factor that we put into all of our algorithms. That certainly has moved him up a little bit. But why you're excited about Legette is because he was on the field for 80% of the snaps last week, and so he continued even after that injury to come back and be on the field for a ton of snaps. Only got 4 targets. Earning targets has been a concern for him this year, and so we would like to see that happen. But we're expecting a ton of dropbacks. We're expecting him to run a lot of routes this week. So even if that target rate per route doesn't, spike, we could still get 6-7 targets out of him. If we're getting 6-7 targets, you're excited about that. The Commanders have faced the 9th most wide receiver targets this year. They've given up the 7th most yards per target to wide receivers. They're tied for worst with 10 touchdowns given up to wide receivers. Everything about this matchup, everything about this expected game script, the expected pace of this matchup suggests we should be looking at these secondary options. And Xavier Legette is probably the best of the secondary options available in this game.
Again, find me a guy you don't want to play in this game.
Oh, I'm sure I could. Miles Sanders.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough.
I found you. Tommy Tremble. Ian
Nah,
Thomas.
thwarted.
Anyway, all right, that's it. That's it for us. We really appreciate y'all tuning in and listening. Remember to, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast, like, rate, review, all of that stuff. Head over to Sharp Football Analysis. You can get Rich's thoughts on every single player of every single game in his worksheet previews. Later on in the week, on Saturday, you'll get his DFS picks. On Sunday morning, he hosts his live Q&A. Make sure you check out all of that as part of our fantasy football package, which you can get for 20% off using promo code ANGLES. So make sure you go and do that. And Rich and I will be back to talk with you next week.